Welcome to See Beneath Your Beautiful, where guests share stories of adversity and perseverance, which inspire, encourage, and challenge us. We embrace these tough conversations, intimately exploring our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness.
I am Ruth Rathblott. I am a TEDx and inspirational speaker and a longtime award-winning nonprofit leader. I'm so grateful that we're connected. I wanted a chance to be able to talk about kind of my passion project and how I think about the world of diversity through the lens of disability. Oftentimes we have a definition of diversity in our minds that we think of. We often think of race, we think about gender, and maybe sexual orientation. And what's left out of the conversation is disability, the visible and the invisible. Mm-hmm. And I was born missing my left hand. I've come to know it as a limb difference. But for growing up, I would say, I was missing my left hand or I have a little hand. It's a congenital birth anomalation. And so it's something that made me anomaly. It's something that made me different. And for much of my life, I didn't want to be seen as different. I strived to fit in. When we think about diversity, we think about differences, but not all differences.
You were saying that your parents didn't treat you any differently, but as soon as you went to school, like instinctually, you tried to hide your hand.
I was born in the days before sonograms. And so my birth was a total surprise. I literally came into the world a surprise.
Oh, really?
Yeah, nobody knew. I mean, it was a time also that there wasn't a lot of information about limb differences or birth anomalies.
Oh, your disability was a surprise, but not the birth of you. Your mother knew she was pregnant.
Oh, yeah. No, my birth was planned.
I've heard of that, but that was not something you had mentioned.
I should probably check out with my father if that's accurate, but I think it is. I was planned. And I think I came a week late. So I was really overdue, actually. My hand was something that no one expected. And so there was a nurse, luckily, in the delivery room who kind of noticed my parents not sure what to do with all of it. And she came over, and her words of wisdom and their mantra that they ended up kind of going by was, you'll treat her as normal. You'll treat her as you would any other child. And that's exactly what they did. They truly encouraged me to try everything, to succeed at things, but also to recognize how to fail at things. And while that was super important, Hara, the idea is that it also didn't leave space for how to talk about it and what it meant to actually talk about the feelings of being different. What were challenges? What were other people saying? Because there were stares, there were people looking. The only vague memory I have, and it's only because my father shared it with me, is that in first grade, there was a girl who apparently said something about it. And I came home and told my parents, and my father went in and dealt with it with the school and that child. But after that, no, I was kind of just seen as quote unquote normal. And it wasn't until I switched schools and went to a co-ed high school that I started to realize there was something different. I didn't fit in. I wasn't like everybody else with two hands. So I started innocently just tucked it into my pocket that first day, thinking I'll just keep it there for the day. Mm-hmm. I never imagined that hiding piece or a needing to fit in would come to run my life, that I would do that for the next 25 years of my life.
So you're saying not until high school did you really realize it?
No, everybody kind of treated me like I was, a quote unquote normal kid.
Yeah.
People knew about it. So I think that's a piece of it, that people already knew about it. But when I went to this new high school, all of a sudden I was new and I did everything I could to, which is typical teenage angst, right? You just want to fit in. You want to be like everybody else. I tried many times over those 25 years to not hide it. It became a pattern that was really easy to adapt to, just to hide it.
Why do you think we're so worried about differences? You can't help but notice maybe that somebody's missing a hand. What do you wish people would do if they notice?
It's a great two-part question, because I think there's a piece first that I think we notice differences because our brains are wired to notice symmetry, right? Like we look at someone and we see symmetry. And so that's how our brains are wired. So when something's off, we almost do a double take or we stare to try to understand it.
I see.
It's similar to the idea of a car crash, right? We're going along and then all of a sudden something stands out in our way. So we have to make sense of it.
I see.
So I think there's a piece around that with difference and especially limb differences. I think there's also a fear of disability that we have. And there's many reasons why we have a fear of disability, the way that it's portrayed, the stigmas that we hold around disability, and also the way that it can happen to anyone. I mean, the beauty and the challenge with disability is that it can happen to anyone at any time. It doesn't discriminate. You can be any race, any gender, any age, and disability can be there. So I think there's a fear piece to that as well. And because we've gotten these messages that disability is less than, that disability is scary. The best part of working with kids, and that's been my experience for 25 plus years, is that kids have no filters, right? They ask. And typically it's asking out of curiosity and kindness. They just want to know. But then you have parents who shush their kids and say, oh, don't ask, don't say something. So now we've done two things to disability. One is we've shushed kids in terms of challenging their curiosity. Kids are naturally curious. And so we've told them, hey, don't be curious, especially around disability. And we've then secondhand taught them that disability isn't something we talk about. Just by that subtle message of shushing kids around it, we've now messaged, we don't talk about disability. It's not something you talk about. Mm-hmm. So that's the other piece. So when you ask, like, how would I like it to be handled? I like when people ask me, but I recognize that there are people who have disabilities who don't like to be asked. Mm-hmm. I like to be asked in a way that's curious, it's kind, and it's supportive.
Give me an example, because you did say people will just come up to you and say crazy things.
The boundaries that we blur with disability are so fascinating.
Yeah.
From being able to ask at any point what happened to your hand to someone yelling out in a parking lot less than a year ago, hey, did you cut it off yourself? People say things. So there's that blurred boundaries around the words we use. There's also blurred boundaries around people will literally come up and touch it.
Oh,
I have not given permission for that. I think of it a lot of times like a mother who is 9 months pregnant and someone comes up or is pregnant and they just start touching.
That really happens.
And this really happens. People will just come up with the hand. They'll hold it. They'll say, oh, isn't she cute? Or can I pray for you?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, well, I'll take the prayers. The idea that it's going to grow miraculously, I haven't seen, and I'm on this planet a while. So I think when I think about people just asking, it's about asking for curiosity's sake in terms of that they can be supportive. Hey, what happened to your hand? How can I help? Is there anything I can do to make it a little bit easier? Not, hey, what happened to your hand because I want to have something on you or I want to put you down or judge you. It's more of, can I be supportive in some way? Wow, what must it have been like to live life single-handedly?
What must it have been like to live life this way?
Well, it's the reason that I named my book Single-Handedly, because when I started to think about how I've lived my life, the direct single-handedly applies. It's a true phrase. But then I think about single-handedly and I think about it from a perspective of strength. When we do things single-handedly, we do them from a position of strength. And there's also a space of we actually don't have to do it all ourselves. And that was kind of the learning lesson. And so as someone who has lived their life with a limb difference and hit it for as long as I did for 25 years, it was exhausting and it was lonely. I truly felt like I was the only one that had this hand. I didn't grow up in the days of the internet where you could find other people. Even the attempts at my family finding other people who looked similar weren't always for me met with such, I wasn't so open to it because I'd had and built such images in my head of what disability meant. I became obsessed with hiding and truly I stopped living my life. And what I mean by that is I stopped doing the things that I enjoyed doing as a kid. So I stopped doing theater. I stopped doing sports. I stopped running for student office. And so when you stop doing those things because you're so worried about judgment and rejection, you stop living your life. You stop enjoying those pieces. And I was constantly worried that someone would find out. And so I was always thinking about the next steps. Well, how did I have to hide it? What did I need to wear to be able to go to the beach? Hey, I'll just not go to the beach. I'd rather not have to take the chance that someone would find out.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped doing even things with friends because I would work up such anxiety that someone was going to find out. So that part was truly exhausting. And the piece around when you disconnect like that and stop living your life, it also becomes super lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found, Hara, is that so many of us are hiding parts of ourselves. I wasn't alone. And so that's the piece I think that's really interesting is so many of us hide parts of ourselves for those same fears. And yet, how do you unhide?
And that's really what I want to know, because I photograph people and I'm doing a boudoir series right now. And boy, the body shame people have, beautiful women who don't see their beauty, is really just so fascinating. And I wonder how that feels to somebody who is missing a limb and these people are able-bodied. We have so much self-loathing despite what we look like, despite how skinny we are. I had one person say they were too skinny to do the photo shoot. So it just doesn't matter.
There's a number of reactions I have, which is the first around body shame, right? Because I think we have not totally seen body image in its glory portrayed in media, right? Or in advertising, et cetera. We need to think about how are we talking about what's beautiful? And so we are starting to have some people coming out. And I think it's amazing that you're taking these photos because it's the idea of how do we show beauty? Because beauty is difference. Beauty is the things that make you unique.
That's what I think. Yeah.
But we've been trained and taught that beauty has a stereotype or that beauty has a formula. And it's why actually my mom didn't let me play with Barbie as a kid because she thought that that wasn't the right stereotype. What she didn't know is that I went to my friends' houses and played. It was not so hard to get a Barbie and to play with them. I actually looked up to Barbie because I thought, oh, she has all of it together. And yes, she has two hands. She was the image. And so when I went to hiding, if I could fool people into thinking that I had two hands, then I could be considered beautiful. Then nobody would say, wow, you're different. What only comes with time and age is that you can redefine beauty for yourself. My hand wasn't my disability. My mind was. The way that I became obsessed with hiding and how awful I thought my hand was. I actually think my hand is beautiful and it's sweet and it's cute. It's a process of self-acceptance and understanding your differences and what you bring into the room and the gift that it is.
If we're lucky, it comes with age.
I have to tell you, I hid my hand even in intimate relationships. And so I was constantly worried. I figured it out with pillows and sheets and et cetera.
Like, how did you hide it?
I know most people are like, how did you hide it? I'm like, first of all, lights out is a great technique. And then second, pillows and sheets, but then you're not enjoying it, right? Like, because you're so worried about being found out that someone's going to grab for your hand or someone's going to grab the extra weight that you have and, you know, in your stomach, wherever.
Yeah.
If you're so worried about it, like you can't enjoy it. And isn't that a shame?
I am just there. I probably am the heaviest I've ever been. And, you know, COVID, PTSD, I don't know what the heck the reason is, but my husband is so loving that I'm also free to be just exactly who I am in this body. It's just a really lovely thing that I don't worry about my stomach, even though it's big. I'm lovable, which is a real light bulb.
And sometimes that takes someone else, to your exact point, showing you how to love that part of yourself, right? Because sometimes we can't do it for ourselves. We can't do it single-handedly. We have to allow others in to show us how to love that part of ourselves that we may think, I can't be sexual, I'm not beautiful, et cetera, because of this thing. Someone came into my life who showed me how to actually look at my hand, how to touch it. It had been buried for so many years, so deep in that pocket that I didn't know it was possible to actually look at it and know how to take care of it. I was able to take those tools that I learned and go into the next phase of what I needed to discover about self-acceptance and self-love. I was really fortunate to meet people with my same limb difference, which opened up my world because it was that shared experience of connection. I seriously, Hara, thought that I was the first person to hide because I became so good at it. I thought I was the only one and I was the best at it. No, it turns out there are other people who've done the exact same thing. I wasn't so creative and so clever. I thought I was, but other people were just as creative and clever in terms of that space. And so when you start to then talk about it, you start to get more comfortable and to realize that you're not alone.
We can't help ourselves from noticing. But what is the key to just going, okay, that person's in a wheelchair, whatever. I still feel bad, I guess, for noticing.
You're going to notice. It's when we don't acknowledge or offer kindness that I think we make mistakes. Several years ago, I was questioned about the diversity of leadership in the organization. And when I went through and asked, well, do you see me as diverse? The answer back was, well, you're a woman. That was one person's response. And I was like, yeah, that's a lens of diversity for sure. I said, what about my limb difference? And the direct quote was, oh, we don't see you like that. And it wasn't asking to be seen like that. It was asking for it to be acknowledged as part of my lived experience.
Yeah.
And being mindful that if we ever said to someone else, oh, I don't see you as a woman.
Right.
I don't see you as a color. We need to acknowledge differences. We also need to recognize that we are all different. And so what is the space that disability can hold, and how can we acknowledge it and move on, move forward? Disability is a part of me. I don't want it to be all of me. It's not all of me,
right?
But a piece of me that I want it to be talked about. And what's interesting is that about 6 months later, the person who said, I don't see you that way, came back and said, wow, if you had ever said to me, I don't see you as Black, I wouldn't be okay with it. He had the same exact reaction that I think I hear you saying too, is I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, right? I think so many of us are afraid of, because we've kind of come into a world which is about political correctness. Many people don't want to get taken to HR if they say something wrong. So it's about being curious and asking questions. And I will just add, being okay if someone doesn't want to discuss it.
Right.
I happen to be someone that I like when people ask me, hey, what happened to your hand? In a way of, how can I support you? Or curiosity. There are going to be people, though, that say, you know what? It's really none of your business.
It reminds me of the interview I did with a man who transitioned at 30. I was nervous about asking the right questions. And he was like, if you're doing it with curiosity and compassion, then you can't ask the wrong question.
I was recently part of a group, and we were talking about what we do for a living. And I said, oh, I'm a professional speaker and I'm an upcoming author. And I said, I talk about diversity through the lens of disability. And I said, I was born with limb difference. And one of the people in the group said, well, what does that mean? Can you show us? And I'm like, well, if I, now to be outed in front of a group, that's show and tell to me.
Yeah, I see that.
I really felt like a kid where I had to obey and show it. What I should have done in hindsight is said, let me describe it to you. I don't need to show it.
Yeah.
Or maybe just Google it.
I'm just trying to get tips because I want to not be afraid of differences. Just meet people where they're at. That is the real bottom line.
Yes. Yes. And it's knowing that it's okay when someone's, to your point of meeting them where they're at, is it's okay if they put up a boundary and say, I'm not going there. Respecting that, just like you would want to be respected as a person of your own boundaries. I do think it boils down to, though, this idea that how do we understand our own differences first before we start to look at others' differences? So it's like, what makes me different? When have I felt different?
Mm-hmm.
When have I been in a situation where I haven't felt like I fit in? What did it feel like, so that I can then not necessarily step in someone's shoes, because I don't think we can truly ever do that. But what can I imagine for a minute feels like, oh, I understand that space of whether it's shame or whether it's pride of difference, whether tuning into our own differences and owning them before we start to do the work and embark on trying to change the world around differences, understanding our own differences first.
Right. And the only work you can do is on yourself. That makes sense. Anytime you know somebody's story, when you get to know somebody, it just changes everything.
The biggest gift after meeting someone who taught me how to love myself, meeting this shared group of people who are, have limb differences, was when I started to share out my story. because then others came back and said, oh my God, I felt like that too. Yeah, I don't have a limb difference, but I have, whether it's where I am on my mental health journey or whether it's I hide my stutter at work, I hide the way that I speak. I don't tell people that about my ethnicity. Like many people are hiding parts of themselves.
Oh, yeah. I grew up in Miami, but I live on the West Coast, and I definitely do not promote that I'm Jewish.
Right. For fear of what?
For fear of judgment. It's very, very, very Christian in this area. And I don't know. When I was younger, I moved from Miami to Tampa at 12, and somebody honestly asked if I had horns because I was Jewish. And so I learned at 12 to not tell people I was Jewish. I was the first Jewish person somebody had seen. And I was like, I didn't understand. Like, what difference does it make who I pray to? I tiny get judgment. People not liking me for something they think about me.
There's a weather forecaster in Florida who has a limb difference. And recently somebody wrote into the station and said, please get him off the air because I can't stand looking at his hand. And he's like, I'm going to switch stations. When we do that, right? Like there's so many reactions to that. Like, why would you talk about somebody else like that? How insecure must you feel?
Right.
But second, that you would take the time to be mean to someone and unkind.
Take the time, right? They had to plan that out.
And it's not okay. Like that person who said to you about the horns, first of all, that's in your head, like since 12, those things stick. I honestly do believe that the way that we are going to unite with each other is to showcase our differences. I absolutely do. And that our differences will bring us together. They're not the things that will divide us, but we have to create space where there's curiosity and compassion for it, for sure.
Yeah. I think if there's so much lack of self-acceptance, how can we love others if we can't love ourselves?
That's the key to it. Right. And that's about owning your differences. How do you get in touch with what makes you different and comfortable with that so that you can then be there for someone else when they have differences? That person who said that to you when you were 12, where was their own head in terms of how they have acceptance of themselves? Because you don't say that. If you've accepted yourself and accepted things that are different, you don't say things like that.
I just think it's funny. I mean, that's probably what they were taught, that Jewish people had horns.
Right.
But it did stick with me. And I did not share after that I was Jewish. But I came from Miami where everybody was Jewish. I thought just everybody was Jewish.
Well, and I came from a town that was not Jewish. And we were probably like, this is probably an exaggeration, one of 4 families. I'm sure there were more. We would go out to dinner and we would change our last name at the restaurant. And I grew up believing, though my father says it's not true now, but I grew up believing that we did it because of anti-Semitism. That's the story I was actually told by my mother. But we changed our name to Reed. I mean, from Rathblott to Reed, that's kind of far. My father says it's because it was easier to make a reservation. So somebody wouldn't have to spell out the last name. But as a little kid, I remember like little kids pick up on things, right? So when, again, I go back to the shushing of kids, when we shush kids around difference and disability, we're giving them the message not to be curious and not to talk about disability. Don't talk about it.
I grew up the same time era as you, and I was definitely shushed, told, don't look, don't point, don't ask. And also my mother's maiden name was Schwartz. And I always was hesitant when they'd say, what's your mother's maiden name? And I'm like, oh no, they're going to know.
The other piece to this equation that I'm interested, especially as a passion project, is this idea of how do we expand diversity? If indeed people with disabilities are the largest minority group, how do we include them in diversity and inclusion conversations to a greater way? If you were to just Google an article around diversity, you often don't see disability mentioned. Even in the Oxford Dictionary, Hera, it talks about diversity and it talks about race and gender and sexual orientation. And then it says, and other. Mm-hmm. And so even in a dictionary, disability isn't mentioned. And so how do we start to reframe some of the conversation to expand it? Disability is kind of the great intersectionality lens, because you can be a woman and have a disability. You can be Black and a woman and have a disability. And so how do we include it so that people aren't left out of the conversation on diversity, that they're actually included?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I was speaking with someone at a higher education institution, and they sent me their statistics on their incoming class. And they said, we're very inclusive. And I'm reading it, and it's, age as a student, it's gender, it's race, nothing about disability.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, if you're being so inclusive, didn't we miss a whole piece of the pie here? Even to the point that I recently received an email from someone in our city's government. The subject of the email was focusing on inclusion. And I read through the email and I noticed disability wasn't mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
There are some campaigns that are starting. I mean, there's a whole campaign out of Hollywood that is talking to screenwriters saying, hey, entertainment industry, if you're talking about diversity and you're not talking about disability, you're not talking about diversity. If you're not included in an agenda, there's definitely a feeling like your voice doesn't matter, but also it perpetuates the idea that you need to keep hidden because it means that you're not being seen, you're not being acknowledged. And so we keep then hiding. I mean, there's a reason that 20% of C-suite leaders are the only ones talking about their disability. We know there are more people out there with visible and invisible differences.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about it. Just like the idea of hiding your religion, it's the same as hiding your disability because we don't want someone to make a judgment.
What two people are alike? Everybody's different. Nobody is exactly alike. I have tried to draw people's faces. I only know one nose, how to draw one kind of eyes. And I think, wow, every single person has different facial features. The way the mouth sits, every little thing. My eyes are completely different than yours, yet I have eyes. Difference is what makes us human.
Yes, it's our greatest gift. It's our greatest gift. It's what we do with our differences that matters, right? And how we utilize them to connect with others. The work that you're doing with photography, right, is able to then highlight how differences can be beautiful. Because again, we're all different, but we're all beautiful.
I really think so. And the more I love me, the more I love everybody. And the more I accept me, I can see everybody's beauty. I've been fighting my weight my whole life and been ashamed of myself, but I just really have this self-acceptance. I am lovable, period. I could really see the difference in my lens, how I view the world.
And isn't it so sad that it took us so long to get there sometimes? It took me to 50 to get there. We couldn't have heard it at 26, right? If somebody said to us who was 50, first of all, we would have thought they were old. 30, you're just getting a little bit more confident or a little bit more rebellious in terms of, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this. 40s, you gain strength and you start to figure some things out. And if you're lucky, you get introspection because you can be like, oh, what is all this about? And do I really care that someone says this? Like you get rid of some of the drama. And at 50, I don't know. I've released a lot of drama and toxicity. If you don't like me, it's okay.
Yeah, totally. 50's magic. There's something magic about turning 50. And I remember as a younger woman, people would say that. And I'm like, well, you have to say that because you're 50. But now I really believe it.
It's an amazing age. My only challenge is it goes so fast.
Right. I remember my dad saying, when you're 70, you think 50's young. And I was much younger thinking he's crazy. But now I feel pretty young at 54.
Yeah.
I'm not an old lady. Oh, sometimes it'll creak a little bit.
Right. Well, that's body. Yeah.
Yeah, that I can't help that.
No. And that, I don't know for you, but for me, it's hair color.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I keep pretending I'm okay with going gray and then color it.
Yeah, I'm not going gray for all. I had this conversation just the other day, and one of my best friends like, I think you look really good with gray. I said, that's great. When I'm 80, we'll find out. I'm not going to do that anytime soon.
I think whatever you want to do to make yourself look the best you can is totally great. It's just a really easy way to take care of myself and make me feel pretty. So
yeah, it's similar to like, I'm not about to lose weight to be in a relationship, right? But I'm willing to, for me to feel healthy, I go for walks, and that's what makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it help then being intimate with people to feel healthy and sexual? Yeah. But that's also because it makes me feel good.
Right.
I think there is a piece also about being in your 50s and accepting your body, because we've all been through, or many of us, I should say, not everyone, but many of us have been through not accepting our bodies and hating them and torturing them for a long time. Even my hand, to bring it back to that too, I wasn't kind to it.
Right.
I neglected it. I get frostbite every year because I didn't know how to take care of how to warm it. It doesn't have the same circulation. And so how do we take care of ourselves and not torture ourselves for someone else, but how do we actually love ourselves?
I love what you said about touching your hand and growing to love it. I had a coach recently who she said I had to be very honest. And so, I don't love my belly. And then in some way, she had me think of it from my belly's viewpoint. And that changed everything for me. Like, say my belly was a young teenager and I was saying, well, I don't like the way you look. Like all of a sudden I could just hear the disdain I had for myself. And from my belly's point of view, I just want love. I just want to be loved. That was a great way to shift my thinking about my body. My belly deserves love as much as the rest of me.
Right. Absolutely. Yet we other those parts of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We neglect them or we hold disdain for them rather than showing compassion and love toward them and kindness. It also goes back to, honestly, Hara, the idea of you might love your belly if the choices were that if you had cancer and it affected your belly, right, your stomach, you'd be like, oh my God, I just want my stomach back. Why not start today loving yourself?
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of See Beneath Your Beautiful, hosted by Hara Allison. And thanks for your ratings and reviews. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Stay tuned.